Manhattan was drowning in a hard November rain, the kind that left the windows of high-rise apartments streaked in gold from the reflections of streetlights and taxi beams, and Elias Mercer's penthouse on Central Park West shimmered like a quiet island above the restless city. Inside the vast living room, the night felt suspended. In amber warm but unbearably still, every sound muted, except for the faint rhythm of droplets tapping the glass. At exactly 11:07, the moment the clock on the mantel clicked its soft warning, Elias lifted his hands and pressed the first aching note on the black and white keys of the Steinway grand piano that dominated the far corner of the room. His fingers moved with the hesitant grace of a man touching a wound that had never fully healed, each note trembling in the air as if afraid to settle. He was a tall man with dark hair falling over his forehead and a face carved by exhaustion rather than age. The city believed Elias Mercer to be the untouchable billionaire founder of Solance AI, a visionary tech empire that built music software used by half the world. But in this room, under this dim light, he looked less like a titan and more like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. This was the hour, the one he could not escape, the hour his life had been split in two. 11:07 at night was when the fire alarms had screamed in that studio 3 years ago, the night his wife and 8-year-old daughter had been trapped behind collapsing beams, the night he had arrived too late. He never spoke of it, not to shareholders, not to interviewers, not to the world that hailed him as brilliant, but he played through it every night. The soft swirl of the piano music drifted down the hallway, where Lena Hart was finishing up, wiping the stainless steel countertop in the kitchen. She had been hired through an agency just 2 weeks ago, a temporary arrangement meant to tide over the staff shortage, while Mrs. Patel, the usual housekeeper, visited her daughter in Florida. Lena moved efficiently, careful and quiet, because this penthouse was nothing like the small brick shelter she shared with her younger brother, and she still felt like she might break something just by breathing too loudly. She wrung out the cloth and hung it to dry before stepping into the hall, and that was when she heard it again, that haunting melody she couldn't name, yet somehow felt so deeply it tightened her chest. She paused, fingertips grazing the hallway wall. The music pulled her like a tide, and she followed it the way a child follows a lullaby. At the end of the corridor, the door to the music room, one she had never been inside, hung slightly ajar, a thin sliver of warm light spilling into the dark hall. It seemed almost accidental, as if the door had forgotten to close entirely. That small opening was enough. Lena stopped in front of it, holding her breath to avoid making the hinge creak. Through the narrow gap she saw only part of the room, the polished wood floor, the framed photographs on the shelf, the edge of the glossy piano body, and the silhouette of the man seated before it. She was not close enough to see his face fully, but she saw his shoulders broad and tense, rising and falling with each inhale as he played. There was a quiet anguish in the way his fingers pressed into the keys, like he was chasing something that kept slipping away. One note missed its landing slightly, and Lena saw his right shoulder flinch so subtly she would have missed it had she blinked. It was as if the mistake hurt him not in pride, but in memory. She had heard people talk about Elias Mercer in hushed tones at the agency office, calling him brilliant, intimidating, and impossibly wealthy. But none of them had described this version of him, a man sitting alone in a room, trying to hold together the fragile pieces of his own past. She felt something shift inside her, something like recognition, or maybe empathy, or maybe the echo of her own broken dream of ever returning to music school. She didn't mean to stare, but she couldn't pull herself away either. The melody was too mournful, too intimate, the kind of sound that didn't belong to a performance or a practice session. It belonged to grief, raw, quiet lingering. Lena found her hand rising instinctively to rest on the doorframe, steadying herself as her breath softened to match the rhythm of the piano. She remembered the nights before her mother died, when she used to play cheap second-hand upright pianos at the community center, just to drown out the arguments in the kitchen or lull her little brother to sleep. Music saved her once, and as she listened now, she wondered if Elias was using it to keep himself from sinking too. She should have walked away. The thought pricked her mind gently but firmly. She was just the maid for 3 nights a week. She was supposed to do her tasks, leave the room spotless, and stay invisible. And yet she stood there unmoving, captivated by the purity of the sound and the heaviness behind it. Through the tiny gap, she could see part of his left hand, his knuckles pale, from the pressure he exerted on the keys. At one point, he paused, suspended mid-chord, as though the next note threatened to unlock something he wasn't ready to relive. The silence that followed was sharper than the music, and just as she leaned in a fraction of an inch, the piano rang again, softer now, hesitant, the way someone speaks, after choking back tears. Lena swallowed the lump rising in her own throat. She barely knew this man, but she knew that sound. That was the sound of someone trying not to fall apart. She didn't realize she had stepped closer, the tip of her shoe now almost touching the threshold, until the wooden floor creaked beneath her weight, very quietly, almost imperceptibly. But Elias heard it. The music faltered, his fingers froze above the keys, suspended like a photograph mid-motion. Then slowly his head turned toward the cracked door, toward her, toward the quiet presence he had sensed in the hallway for nights, without admitting it to himself. Lena felt the air seize in her lungs. She didn't move, not even to blink. It was as if the whole city outside had paused with her, waiting for what would happen next. And in that suspended moment, with the storm whispering against the glass, and the last note still trembling in the air, Elias Mercer stared at the sliver of hallway light and the unseen figure behind it, as if he knew she was there, as if he had felt her long before he turned, as if this moment had been waiting for both of them all along. The moment Elias Mercer turned toward the cracked door, Lena felt every nerve in her body snap tight, as if someone had pulled a thread through her spine. But instead of storming toward the hallway or demanding why she was standing there, he simply stared for a long, suspended breath, then let his gaze drift back to the keys, not playing, not moving, just sitting in a silence that felt heavier than the song that came before it. Lena took one careful step backward, then another, hoping he had not truly seen her, hoping the darkness of the hallway had disguised her presence. But before she could slip away, a low voice carried through the narrow gap, quiet, steady, strangely calm. "You can come in if you want." No accusation, no irritation, only an unexpected gentleness that stopped her retreat, cold. She froze in place, gripping the edge of her cleaning apron, the way a child clings to a blanket. She pushed the door a little, not enough to enter fully, but enough to see him clearly, now bathed in the warm golden glow of the floor lamp. Elias leaned back slightly, his hands resting loosely on his thighs, his expression unreadable except for a faint, exhausted sadness etched along the lines of his jaw. "Do not be afraid," he added, though he said it without looking at her, as if he knew she needed the reassurance, but he was too tired to give more. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped inside, just far enough that the door no longer shielded her, though she still stood near the frame, like a guest unsure if she was welcome. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I was just finishing up the kitchen, and I heard you playing." Her voice trailed off because what she really meant was that the sound had reached inside her chest and pulled her down the hallway before she could think about protocol or boundaries or common sense. Elias pressed one hand against the glossy surface of the piano as though grounding himself. "You like music?" he asked, not with curiosity, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had already sensed the answer. Lena nodded acutely, aware of how foolish she must look. Standing in her plain uniform in this stunning room, filled with leather-bound scores, framed photographs, and a grand piano worth more than everything she had owned in her life. "My mother wanted me to study at Juilliard," she said softly. "I used to play a little nothing like you, of course," she added quickly, not wanting to sound presumptuous. Elias gave a faint, half smile, one that never reached his eyes. "I used to play too," he said before stopping, correcting himself. "I guess I still do." His fingers hovered over the keys, but he did not touch them. Lena shifted her weight, glancing briefly at the photographs on the shelf. One in particular caught her eye, a picture of a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, wearing oversized headphones and holding a sparkly toy microphone. The frame was slightly tilted, as if someone had picked it up recently and set it down with shaking hands. She understood then with a clarity that hit her like a breath knocked from her lungs that this room was not simply a music space, it was a shrine. Elias followed her gaze, and for a moment something raw flickered in his expression. "Her name was Maisie," he said quietly. "She used to sit on my lap and mash the piano keys, convinced she was composing something important." His voice cracked almost invisibly, but enough for Lena to hear it. She looked down, unsure if she should offer sympathy or stay silent. He saved her the choice. "They died 3 years ago. Studio fire, electrical malfunction," they said. "I got there 8 minutes too late, 11:07 p.m. That is why I play then, each night." He inhaled slowly through his nose, the kind of breath someone takes when trying not to drown in memory. "I was supposed to be there that night with them," he added, but the sentence was no longer about information, it was a confession soaked in guilt. Lena whispered, "I am so sorry, genuinely." Sincerely, instinctively, the way one speaks when witness to someone else's private breaking. Elias did not nod, did not acknowledge the sympathy. He simply let the words float and then settle. "They all say time heals," he murmured, "but they do not tell you that guilt stops the clock." "I stopped living the same night they did." The admission was not loud, but it was devastating, and Lena felt her chest tighten in response. She wanted to walk closer, but did not dare. "I did not mean to interrupt your playing," she said softly. "I just heard the melody, and it was so sad and beautiful, it felt like someone calling from far away." Elias blinked, as if startled by the accuracy. "I cannot finish the song," he confessed. "I have tried dozens of times. It was Maisie's last composition." He added, "Her melody, not mine. She called it her magic song. I promised that one day we would record it together." He tapped the keys lightly, producing a ghost of a sound. "I keep thinking if I finish it, she will be gone forever." Lena took a slow breath, feeling the ache in his words, like they were her own. Sometimes, she said, memories do not disappear when the song ends. Sometimes they stay because we let them. He looked at her, then really looked at her. His gaze steady for the first time since she had stepped into the room. No one has said that to me before. She offered a tiny smile. I guess no one else is here when you play. That earned a quiet exhale, not quite a laugh, but close. Elias rubbed his thumb along the edge of the piano. I do not usually play with the door open. It was almost closed, she admitted. I did not think you would hear me. I always hear, he murmured, though he said it more to himself than to her. Silence settled between them again, not sharp this time, but gentle. After a long moment, he gestured toward the bench, barely lifting his hand. Do you want to sit? He asked softly. She shook her head quickly. No, thank you. I should probably let you rest. She stepped back to the doorway, placing her palm on the frame once more, as though anchoring herself. Elias watched her retreat, a faint flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Before she slipped out, he said, You can listen any time. It was an invitation, not an order, not a request, but something fragile offered carefully, like a glass that could break if held too tightly. Lena nodded once, then stepped fully into the hall, pulling the cracked door mostly closed behind her, leaving only the faintest sliver of light and the soft echo of a man who had spent years talking only to his piano until tonight. The next morning, Lena moved through the penthouse with unusual quietness, as if the air itself carried the echo of the previous night, and she feared making a sound that might break it. She dusted the bookshelves in the living room, replaying his words in her mind. You can listen any time, a sentence so simple yet heavy, with an intimacy Elias perhaps did not even realize he had offered. Around noon, she found herself drifting past the doorway to the piano room, pausing without meaning to her hand, brushing the cool marble wall. The door was shut fully this time. No sliver of light, no quiet hum of music, only silence thick and unmoving. She turned away hurriedly, embarrassed at her own curiosity, and returned to polishing the windows overlooking Manhattan. The view usually distracted her, but not today. She kept thinking about the way Elias had looked at the photograph of his daughter, the fragile tremor in his fingers, the guilt stitched into every breath he took. She wondered if he slept at all last night. She wondered if he had regretted letting her into the room. She wondered if she had crossed a line by standing there. That evening, when she finished the downstairs chores, she carried a stack of fresh towels toward the upper floor. As she passed the piano room, she noticed the faintest sound, not music, but movement like someone pacing. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself not to stop. She was about to continue down the hallway when the door opened behind her. Lena. His voice was low, steady, carrying a softness that surprised her. She turned slowly, clutching the towels to her chest. Elias stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair slightly mussed, as if he had run his hands through it too many times. His expression was unreadable but not cold. He stepped aside, a silent invitation. She hesitated, but he nodded toward the room. It is all right. You can come in? She stepped across the threshold, feeling the familiar warmth of the floor lamp on her skin. The piano bench remained where it had been the night before, but Elias did not sit. Instead, he leaned against the instrument, his arms loosely crossed his gaze, following her silently. About last night, he began choosing his words carefully. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable. She blinked, surprised. You didn't. It was me who should apologize for intruding. You were not intruding, he said, his tone unexpectedly firm. The door was open for a reason. She frowned a little. You left it open on purpose. Elias looked away briefly, as if embarrassed. I do not know. Maybe I wanted someone to hear. Or maybe I just did not want to be alone in that moment. The confession tugged something deep in her chest. She placed the towels on a side chair and stepped a little closer, though still keeping a respectful distance. Your music is beautiful, she said quietly. Not flattery but truth. It is more than beautiful. It feels like something trying to say what words cannot. He studied her for a long moment. No one has said anything kind about my music in years. After the accident, people stopped trying. They tiptoe around me, afraid to say the wrong thing. Afraid to exist near me at all. She swallowed softly. I am not afraid of you. He held her gaze, then nodded once almost imperceptibly. I know. That is why I asked you in. He walked around the piano, tracing a finger along the frame, like a man trying to remember how to inhabit his own life. I keep playing the same piece over and over, he murmured, because if I stop, I am afraid I will forget the sound of her laugh. Lena listened to the trembling breath hidden beneath his words. She stepped closer, not touching him, not daring to, but offering presence like a gentle anchor. Memories do not disappear because you stop playing, she said softly. They stay because you loved her. Elias closed his eyes briefly, as if her words hurt and healed him at the same time. When he opened them, she had stepped even closer, not enough to breach boundaries, but enough for him to feel the warmth of another human being in a room that had been cold for years. He nodded toward the bench. Sit with me. She shook her head quickly. I can't, I will break something. He actually smiled faintly, the first real unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. You will not break anything. It is only wood and keys. She sat timidly on the far edge of the bench, leaving a careful space between them. Elias sat beside her, the air between them charged, not romantic, not yet, but aware. He placed his hands on the keys and played a single chord, low, soft, resonant. Lena shivered at the way the sound filled the room, like a breath after a long, suffocating pause. She whispered, "It is beautiful." He pressed another note, then another, letting the fragments of the unfinished melody drift into the air like fragile moths. This is where she always got stuck, he murmured, pointing to the last transition. She would giggle and say, Daddy, it needs more sparkle. Lena smiled at the image. Maybe she was right. Maybe it needs something brighter, something that feels like morning after a storm. Elias looked at her again, that intense searching gaze that made her feel both exposed and seen in the same heartbeat. You speak as if you know music. She shrugged lightly. I used to, before life happened. He nodded, understanding. Life has a way of doing that. They sat in a silence that was no longer heavy but thoughtful. After a long moment, he pressed one last soft chord, then lifted his hands from the keys. Thank you for listening, he said. The words were simple but carried weight. I have not said that to anyone in a very long time. She stood slowly smoothing her uniform. Any time she whispered before stepping back toward the door. His voice followed her barely above a breath. Then please listen again tomorrow. She paused one hand on the cracked door. I will. And when she closed the door behind her, leaving only a narrow seam of golden light, Elias found himself staring at it long after she walked away, realizing for the first time in years that silence could be something other than punishment. It could be connection waiting to return. For the next 2 days, the penthouse existed in a strange, gentle suspension, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to shift. Lena went about her routine with careful steps, wiping the stainless steel counters in the kitchen, arranging the fresh linens in the hall cabinet, watering the small fern near the balcony, while every so often her thoughts drifted back to the sound of Elias Mercer saying, "Then please listen again, tomorrow." She tried not to think too much about what it meant, but the truth pressed softly against her mind like a note held too long on a piano string. On Thursday evening, she finished her duties earlier than usual and found herself lingering by the hallway again, listening for any hint of a melody. But the piano room was quiet. She sighed gently, then turned toward the laundry room when the soft click of a door made her stop. Elias stood at the far end of the hall, one hand braced against the door frame, his expression troubled, as if he had been wrestling with a decision for hours. "Lena," he said quietly, "can you come here for a moment?" She swallowed and approached slowly, clutching the hem of her sleeve. When she reached him, he stepped aside, allowing her into the room, not the piano room this time, but his study, a space she had never entered. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Papers were spread across the desk, and Elias looked suddenly older, the lamplight exposing the deep fatigue beneath his eyes. He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing. He drew a slow breath, steadying himself. "I met with my doctor today," he said, "sleep specialist, trauma counselor. All the same advice as always. Medication, cognitive therapy, noise machines. But nothing has worked in 3 years." Lena lowered her gaze, unsure where this was going. He continued, "And last night I slept 4 hours straight, first time since the fire." She inhaled sharply. "Because of the music?" she asked. "Because you were here," he said simply. "Not the music, not the routine. You." She blinked, startled. "Me." "Your presence," he said, choosing each word with deliberate care, "kept me from slipping into those memories. The sound of someone breathing in the hallway, your footsteps, the sense that I was not alone. It quieted something inside me." He met her eyes, a raw honesty in his gaze. "I do not want to assume or exploit or misinterpret anything. This is not about obligation or expectation, but I need to ask you something unusual." Lena felt her pulse quicken. "What is it?" He walked around the desk, retrieving a folder. Inside were papers printed with his company letterhead. A contract, not employment, not a promotion, something else entirely. "I want to propose an arrangement," he said. "You stay here every night, from 10 until 6. Your room would be the small guest room near the piano studio. You do not need to interact with me beyond what is comfortable. You do not need to change anything about your day work, your schedule, your life. I will compensate you, of course, but that is not the heart of it." He paused, collecting himself. "I will cover your brother's full medical insurance, therapy, occupational treatments, everything, for as long as you remain in this arrangement." Lena felt the room tilt. Insurance for her brother was her biggest burden, the single weight that kept her working 2 jobs, often 14-hour days. She whispered, "Why would you do that for me?" His expression softened. "Because you have been honest with me since the first day you walked into this building. You do not treat me like a trophy or a headline or a number. You look at me without calculation. I can breathe when you are near." He looked down briefly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. "I am not asking for anything inappropriate. I am not asking for closeness or affection. I am asking for quiet, Your quiet, the comfort of someone who does not demand anything from me. Her hands shook slightly. And what about boundaries? His voice steadied. They will be strict. 1. You do not sleep in my room or my bed. 2. You do not perform any additional duties beyond your normal housekeeping. 3. No physical intimacy of any kind. 4. If either of us begins developing feelings, we end it immediately. Her chest tightened at the fourth rule, unexpected disappointment, twisting through her, even though she knew she should not feel it. Why that rule, she whispered. Because love complicates everything, he said quietly. And I do not deserve that complication from you. She stared at the contract, the crisp black letters swimming slightly before her eyes. She knew what signing it would mean. Stability, relief, freedom from double shifts, therapy for her brother, a chance to breathe again. But it also meant stepping into the orbit of a man carrying oceans of grief. What happens if I forget the boundaries, she asked, barely audible. Then you walk away, without consequence, he said. You leave this place with everything I promised you. And what happens if you forget them? Elias held her gaze, and the fatigue around his eyes deepened. Then I will walk away. No arguments, no questions, no damage to you. The silence between them thickened heavy, but not suffocating. It was full of unspoken truths, full of fear and longing and the strange, fragile connection growing between them. Finally, he closed the folder and placed it gently into her hands. You do not need to decide now. Take it home, read every line, ask me anything you want. I just need you to consider it. She nodded slowly, her fingers trembling around the folder. Elias stepped aside, allowing her to exit the study. As she reached the door, he spoke again, softer than before. I chose you, Lena, because when you look at me, I do not feel like a ghost. She did not respond. She could not. She walked down the hallway, clutching the folder to her chest, while her heart raced with a mixture of fear and something dangerously close to hope. When she reached her small apartment that night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the contract with its neat columns and cold clauses. She read it once, then again. And when her phone buzzed with a text from her brother's therapist saying the insurance would not cover next month's sessions, she pressed her hand over her mouth and whispered the question that had been haunting her since she left the penthouse. Why does the right thing always feel like the hardest thing to choose? Lena moved into the small guest room beside the piano studio on a quiet Sunday evening, carrying a single suitcase and the weight of a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Elias had arranged everything without extravagance. No fanfare, no servants. Meddling, just a clean room, a neatly made bed, and a folded note on the nightstand that said simply, "Welcome home." The words unsettled her more than they comforted her, because home had never felt like a place. She deserved more, like a borrowed moment, always at risk of being taken away. She placed her clothes in the narrow wardrobe, smoothed the blanket over the bed, then stood in the center of the room, listening to her heartbeat echo in the stillness. At exactly 10, she heard the first soft notes drift through the thin wall. Not the haunting melody he usually played, but something gentler, hesitant like a question, waiting for an answer. She opened her door to find the door to the studio slightly ajar, in the familiar way that had drawn her months ago. She sat on the small cushioned chair she had placed near her doorway, knees tucked under her hands, listening. The music floated between them through the narrow seam, just as it had before. But now there was no secrecy, no guilt. Elias was playing for her, intentionally, consciously, every note a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. After several minutes, his voice carried softly through the crack. "You are here." Not a question, a statement. "Yes," she answered, equally soft. He continued playing, and she closed her eyes, letting the melody seep into her bones. She felt the exhaustion she had been carrying for years slowly begin to loosen. After the piece ended, he did not ask her to come in, and she did not move. This silent companionship felt sacred, like stepping closer might shatter the delicate balance between them. The following nights fell into a steady rhythm. At 10, the lights dimmed, the halls quieted, and Elias sat at the piano while Lena settled on her chair with a book or a sewing kit, or simply her thoughts. He always played the opening of Maisie's unfinished song, then wandered into different variations, never finishing, never daring. Sometimes the melody faltered slightly, and she would hear him exhale as if bracing against a memory. Those moments pulled her heart so tight she had to press a hand to her chest to steady herself. One night, after a particularly heavy pause, she whispered through the door, "Are you all right?" A long silence followed, then his voice low-controlled. "I am trying to be." She hesitated, then replied, "You do not have to try alone." The air seemed to tremble with the honesty of her words. Later that week, she found him in the kitchen early one morning, staring at a pot of untouched coffee, the strong smell filling the room. He glanced up, startled, seeing her in her oversized sweater and bare feet. "You are up early," he murmured. "Could not sleep," she admitted. "Thinking too much." He gave a faint, knowing nod. She reached past him to grab a mug, brushing his sleeve by accident. He stiffened not angrily, but involuntarily, as if touch carried too many memories. She froze immediately. "I am sorry, I did not mean to." "It is all right," he said quietly, forcing his shoulders to relax. "It has been a long time since I have been close to anyone." She held the mug to her chest, not stepping away completely, but giving him space. "I understand," she whispered. That evening the music felt different, as if her presence in the kitchen had softened something inside him. His playing flowed smoother, less jagged, less broken. Between pieces he spoke more. Not much, never rambling, but small details about the books he liked, or how he used to compose, with Maisie tapping random keys and insisting she was adding sparkle. Lena shared pieces of herself too, not everything but enough for him to know she was a person shaped by loss rather than defined by it. She told him about her mother's death, her brother's diagnosis, her abandoned dream of studying music. Elias listened intently, not with pity, but with quiet respect, as if every detail mattered. One night, as she stitched a torn sock, she murmured, "I used to sew costumes for my school choir." The smallest smile touched his lips. "I would have liked to see that," he said. It felt like the first genuine expression of curiosity he had shown toward another human being in years. Slowly, carefully, the silence between them became something alive, not empty, but full of invisible threads weaving them closer. It terrified her how natural it began to feel. One night, after a gentle passage of music, he said softly through the door, "I can tell when you are smiling." She startled, almost dropping her needle. "How?" "Your breathing changes." She covered her mouth, embarrassed. "That is strange, is it not?" "No," he answered simply. "It is human." Another evening, she brought him a cup of hot cocoa, placing it quietly just inside the studio door. He paused mid-chord, glancing at the cup. "You remembered," he said, almost in disbelief. "You told me once you liked it better than tea," she said. His voice warmed ever so slightly. "Thank you, Lena. Thank you for today," she replied, though she was not sure what she meant. Maybe for letting her witness parts of him no one else had. Maybe for being alive. Maybe for not shutting the door. Later, as she sat on her chair mending a button, a sudden realization slid through her chest like a whisper. She was not sitting outside the door because of obligation or contract. She was sitting there because she wanted to. Because Elias Mercer, the man who once felt unreachable, was slowly letting her come into the quietest corners of his heart without even realizing it. And though she reminded herself of the rule, no feelings she could not unfeel what had already begun. There was music forming between them, not made of notes, but of breaths and presence, and unspoken solace. A song neither of them had chosen, yet both were unmistakably playing together. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, delivered in a sleek black envelope, embossed with silver lettering, and placed carefully on the marble kitchen island by Claire, the administrative assistant, who visited the penthouse once a week. Lena noticed it only because Claire cleared her throat in that pointed way that demanded attention. Elias needs someone to accompany him to the Tech and Arts Foundation Gala, she announced as if reading from a script, her eyes scanning Lena from head to toe with a hint of disapproval. "It will help maintain public relations." Lena blinked, struggling to understand. "Me?" Claire tilted her head, slightly, not overtly rude, but unquestionably condescending. "He asked specifically for you, though I cannot imagine why." Before Lena could respond, Elias emerged from his office sleeves, rolled up hair slightly tousled, a sure sign he had been composing or overthinking. Claire handed him the envelope and waited. He barely glanced at it before turning his attention to Lena. "It is Saturday night," he said calmly. "I would like you to come with me." A flutter of panic rose in her chest. "I do not belong at something like that." Elias met her gaze, and something warm flickered in his eyes. "You belong where you are needed, and that night I will need you nearby." He said it so simply, without hesitation, that she could not find words to argue. Claire left shortly, after leaving behind a quiet tension heavy in the room. Lena swallowed. What exactly would I do there? Elias rested his hands on the counter as if weighing his answer. "Be what you already are, steady, real, a reminder that the world is not just noise and cameras and expectations." She stared at him, startled by the sincerity. "I will embarrass you," she whispered. "I do not know how to act around people like that." People like what he asked, genuine confusion, softening his features. "People who exist in rooms worth more than my entire life," she said quietly. "People who do not see someone like me." Elias held her gaze. "I see you." His voice was soft but firm enough that she felt it echo somewhere deep inside. Preparations for the gala began immediately. A stylist arrived Friday afternoon, carrying garment bags, silk ribbons, tiaras, and more makeup than Lena had ever seen in her life. Lena protested, insisting she did not need anything extravagant, but the stylist laughed gently. "You are accompanying Elias Mercer," she said. "The world will be watching." Lena tried on dresses she never imagined touching gowns made of navy satin with delicate beading champagne-colored silk that shimmered under light and pale blue chiffon that fluttered like breath. Elias did not attend the fitting, but she caught glimpses of his shadow passing by the cracked door, pausing, perhaps listening before moving away again. By Saturday evening, she stood in front of the tall mirror, wearing a deep navy gown that fit her like it had been sewn from the shape of her heartbeat. Her hair was curled softly, framing her face. In waves her makeup, natural, enhancing rather than hiding. She barely recognized herself. When she stepped into the hallway, Elias stood waiting, wearing a tailored black suit and a charcoal tie, simple, elegant, commanding. But when he looked at her, he did not look commanding at all. His breath caught the smallest fraction of a second, barely noticeable, unless someone was watching with longing hidden behind control. "You look," he began, then stopped, searching for a word that would not break the fragile boundary between them. "Beautiful," he finished finally, his voice quieter than the space between piano notes. She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you." The gala was held in a grand ballroom of the Manhattan Grand Hyatt chandeliers, dripping light across polished marble floors, guests dressed in shimmering gowns and gleaming tuxedos, moving like constellations in motion. Cameras flashed as soon as Elias arrived, capturing the elusive billionaire who rarely appeared at public events. But as soon as he placed his hand gently at the small of Lena's back, guiding her inside, whispers began. "Who is she? She is not from the usual circles. She looks too timid, too plain, probably hired for companionship." The murmurs curled like smoke around her ankles, threatening to drag her down, but Elias leaned in, slightly, his voice a quiet anchor. "Just stay close," he murmured. "Nothing here can touch you if I am standing beside you." She nodded, gripping her small silver clutch. They navigated the room together, smiling politely, greeting donors and board members, accepting compliments and veiled judgments. Elias remained composed, unbothered, but Lena could feel the sting behind each whispered remark, like tiny needles pressing into her skin. Near the buffet table, a woman in a diamond gown leaned toward her companion, intentionally loud. "Is that not the maid from his building? I heard he keeps her around for company." Their laughter was soft but sharp enough to cut. Lena stiffened, humiliation pooling hot beneath her ribs. Before she could step back, Elias turned sharply, his voice carrying across the table, not loud but unmistakably firm. "That woman you are whispering about is the reason I can breathe again. And if you cannot show her respect, then you do not deserve my attention." Silence rippled outward, like a wave crashing through the glittering room. The woman paled, her smile dissolving instantly. Her companion stared down at his champagne glass, suddenly fascinated by the bubbles. Lena could only stare at Elias, stunned by the quiet protectiveness in his stance, the unmistakable loyalty in his eyes. He offered his arm again, his gesture gentle. "Let us go." Outside, beneath the soft canopy lights, Lena wrapped her arms around herself, still trembling. "You did not have to defend me," she whispered. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice low, steady, certain. "You are not invisible, Lena. Not to me." She looked up at him, and the Manhattan night reflected in his eyes the gold and blue of the skyline shimmering in pupils that had once held nothing but grief. For a moment the noise of the world faded again, leaving only the quiet between them, the same quiet that first connected them through a cracked door. On the ride home, neither spoke, but their silence was no longer empty. It thrummed alive with everything neither of them dared say yet. The night after the gala, the penthouse felt unusually still, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to crack open between them. Lena changed out of her uniform and sat in her small chair near the cracked door, just as she had every night since the arrangement began. But the moment the first note drifted through the narrow seam, she knew something was different. The melody was not tentative or searching. It was heavy, trembling, full of grief, so raw it felt like a hand closing gently around her heart. Elias did not warm up as he usually did. He plunged straight into Maisie's unfinished composition, the delicate opening threading through the air like a soft apology. Lena closed her eyes, absorbing the familiar sadness the way one absorbs a cold wind by leaning into it rather than away. But tonight he did not stop where he always did. He pushed past the point in the melody where his breath typically broke, where memory overtook skill. His fingers crashed into a dissonant chord, then another, then silence. A silence so sharp it made her sit forward, gripping the arms of her chair. She heard him exhale shakily, and despite every rule, every boundary, every line she had promised herself, she could not stay behind the door this time. She rose on instinct, pressing her palm against the cracked door before pushing it open, slowly allowing the soft golden light to spill onto her feet like a hesitant welcome. Elias sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, his hands dangling loosely, his shoulders shaking with a quiet tremor that did not belong to anger, but to something far more fragile. She stepped carefully into the room, her footsteps barely audible. He did not look up. His voice when it came was barely more than a breath. "I cannot finish it." His shoulders rose and fell with a painful rhythm. "I try and I try, but the last measure feels like a goodbye, and I do not know how to say it." Lena moved closer, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his posture, the brokenness of a man who had spent years trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "You do not have to finish it alone," she whispered. He finally lifted his gaze, and when their eyes met, she saw the storm behind them, grief and guilt and exhaustion, twisting into something he could no longer hide. His voice cracked. "If I finish the song, she disappears. If I stop, I am failing her memory. Tell me how to choose between losing her and losing myself." She knelt beside him, her hands loosely folded in her lap, grounding herself so she would not reach out, even though every part of her wanted to. "You are not losing her," she said softly. "Music does not trap memories. Your love carries them." She hesitated, then added gently, "She would not want you to stay frozen in her last unfinished note." He swallowed hard, his throat working. "My therapist says I use the song as punishment, that I blame myself so much I cannot allow myself to move forward." He shut his eyes as if ashamed of admitting it. "Maybe he is right, but I do not know how to stop." Lena exhaled slowly, letting her voice steady into something soft but firm. "You do not have to stop. You just need someone beside you when the memories get heavy. Someone to help you hold them." His fingers twitched as if wanting to reach for hers, but he resisted. She saw the battle in his eyes. The rule was there. No feelings, no closeness, no lines crossed, but rules meant nothing to pain and even less to healing. He turned toward the piano and placed his trembling hands on the keys. "Play with me," he whispered, though it sounded more like a plea than an invitation. She shook her head gently. "I do not know the song." He glanced at her desperation flickering. "Then just sit with me." Her breath caught, but she nodded, rising slowly and lowering herself onto the bench beside him, leaving only a careful inches-wide space between them. It felt like the most intimate distance in the world. He began again, the opening note soft and shaking, like a memory afraid to be touched. This time, when he reached the part where he always faltered, she placed her hand lightly on the cool wooden edge of the piano, grounding him without touching him. His breath steadied almost imperceptibly. "Continue," she whispered. "You are not alone. His fingers grazed the next chord, tentative, unsure, but he kept going, letting the melody spill forward in incomplete pieces, as if trusting her presence to catch the fragments before they shattered. When he reached the final measure, his hands froze over the keys, trembling violently. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them sliding down his cheeks silently. "I cannot," he choked out. "It hurts too much." Lena felt her own eyes sting. "Then do not finish it tonight," she whispered. "Just breathe. Just be here. With me." He shut his eyes and leaned forward slightly, his forehead nearly touching the edge of the piano. For a moment, neither moved. Their breaths synchronized without intention, rising and falling like two waves meeting in the same tide. She felt something shift in the air, something fragile and profound, like a door inside him opening after years of being locked. Slowly he looked at her, his voice raw. "When you sat behind the door, I felt safe. Tonight you stepped through it, and I am terrified of how much that means." She swallowed the ache in her throat. "It means you are not meant to carry your grief alone anymore." His expression trembled, cracks forming in the stoic armor he had worn for so long. Her presence softened him in ways neither expected. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes. "Do not force the song. Let it wait until you are ready." He nodded barely. As she walked back toward the door, he whispered, "Thank you for stepping in." Her hand rested on the frame. "Thank you for letting me." And as she returned to her room, the melody lingered unfinished, but no longer abandoned, like a promise waiting for the courage of two hearts, learning how to breathe again. In the days that followed the night of the unfinished song, an unspoken understanding settled between them, a fragile warmth that neither acknowledged aloud, but both felt in every shared silence. Lena continued her nightly vigil by the cracked door, though now the boundary felt less like a rule and more like a gentle rhythm they had learned together. Elias played softer, calmer sometimes, drifting into new melodies that hinted at healing like early sunlight filtering through storm clouds. She heard him hum once barely audible, but enough to make her chest swell with quiet hope. But as their world grew steadier, forces outside the penthouse began to shift unnoticed like dark clouds gathering far from shore. It started small with a strange tension in Elias' posture. During phone calls, short-clipped conversations, and the tightening of his jaw when reading emails. He assured her nothing was wrong, but she sensed otherwise. One evening she brought him cocoa and found him staring at a document on his laptop, his expression carved with disbelief and anger. He closed the screen too quickly and forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Go get some rest, Lena," he murmured. "It is late," but she heard the tremor beneath his attempt at calm. She retreated reluctantly, but worry gnawed at her. The next morning she discovered the first crack in the world they had built. When she stepped outside to take the trash, a camera flash exploded from behind a parked car. She recoiled instinctively, shielding her face. Another flash followed, then another, before a man sprinted away, disappearing into the street traffic. Her heart thudded painfully. Why would anyone photograph her? She hurried back inside, breath shaking, but said nothing, afraid of being seen as a burden or distraction. Later that day, Claire arrived earlier than usual, her heels clicking sharply across the marble floor, as if slicing into the calm. She barely acknowledged Lena while storming into Elias' office, closing the door behind her with a thud. Voices rose muffled but intense. Lena caught fragments, board concerns, media alert, not sustainable, scandal if leaked. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. Moments later, the door opened abruptly, and Claire stepped out, eyes blazing as they landed on Lena. "You," she spat. "Stay away from anything that is not your job." Lena froze, stunned by the venom. Claire straightened, smoothing her blouse, before stalking toward the elevator without another word. Lena stood trembling, confused, and humiliated. When Elias called her name, she stiffened before turning slowly. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes deeper than usual. "Ignore her," he said quietly. "Claire forgets compassion when she is stressed. That is all." But his voice lacked conviction, and she knew he was hiding something. That night, the atmosphere felt thinner, more fragile. The piano melody faltered repeatedly, and Lena could tell he was distracted. At one point, he stopped completely and spoke through the cracked door, his voice clipped. "Did anything unusual happen today?" She hesitated, remembering the camera flashes, the fear. "A man was outside earlier," she admitted, "taking photos, I think." Elias cursed under his breath, a sound she had never heard from him before. His chair scraped back. "Stay inside from now on. Do not go out alone." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he added lower, "Someone is digging into my private life. The board thinks I am distracted, that I am slipping. If they find a narrative to weaponize, they will." Lena hugged her arms around herself. "Because of me?" "No," he said firmly, too firmly, as if trying to convince himself as much as her. "This is not your fault." But guilt burrowed into her chest anyway. She did not sleep. The next morning, everything collapsed. Around noon, her phone buzzed repeatedly, vibrating against the counter. She glanced at the screen and froze. A headline flashed across every major news app, accompanied by a blurry photograph of her entering the penthouse. "Lonely tech billionaire keeps nightly companionship contract with housekeeper." Beneath it, smaller text screamed, "Employee paid to stay overnight. Intimate deal or power imbalance." A cold wave rolled through her. Her lungs tightened painfully. Her world spun. She fumbled for the remote, turning on the TV, only to find the same story broadcast across every channel. The leaked photograph was grainy but unmistakable, and beside it was a copy of a document stamped with Mercer's company letterhead. Her contract, or rather a distorted version of it, edited to imply something darker than truth. Her throat closed. Someone had stolen the original papers from her room and twisted them into poison. Her hands shook violently as she gripped the counter. She had no idea when or how it was taken. A horrible thought struck her. Claire had borrowed her room key several days earlier for a maintenance check that never happened. The realization hit like ice. Before she could process it, the elevator doors opened sharply, and Elias strode in, his expression thunderous, controlled only by sheer force of will. He held a stack of printed articles crumpled at the edges. "Sit," he said, voice low. She obeyed, hands trembling. His jaw clenched as he set the papers down. "Someone accessed your room and stole the contract. They modified clauses, added false statements. My legal team confirmed it. The leak hit every major outlet within 30 minutes. They are calling for a formal investigation. Some board members want my resignation pending review." He dragged a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. She had never seen him allow himself. "They are framing this as exploitation," he said quietly. "That I paid you to be with me at night." She flinched at the ugly implication, even though she knew it was false. She whispered, "I am ruining your life." He snapped his head up, eyes blazing. No, do not ever say that. This is not your doing. This is someone targeting me through the one place they know I am vulnerable. The words pierced her heart, both warming and breaking it. But she could not escape the guilt. Her presence had become the weapon used against him. She lowered her head, whispering, "I should leave." He stepped forward, shaking his head fiercely. "I will not let them take you from the only place you are safe. I will fix this, I swear it." But she saw the tremor in his hands, the flicker of fear behind his determination. The storm was breaking, and she felt its winds pulling them apart, even as he fought to hold everything together. Outside, the first drops of rain hit the window sharp and cold, as if the city itself sensed what was coming. The storm outside grew heavier through the night, rain streaking down the glass in relentless lines that blurred the Manhattan skyline into a wash of gray and gold. But inside the penthouse, the true storm raged within Elias Mercer. The board demanded an emergency hearing scheduled for the next morning. Lawyers flooded his inbox with warnings, and reporters crowded the sidewalk below like vultures circling a wounded animal. Lena stood in the kitchen, clutching a glass of water, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she listened to Elias pace in his office. His footsteps sharp, agitated, restless. She wanted to comfort him, but did not know how not when she herself felt like the fracture point in his life. Around midnight, his pacing stopped, abruptly replaced by a suffocating silence. She hesitated, then approached the office door, raising her hand to knock. But her knuckles never made contact, because the door opened suddenly, and Elias stood there, shoulders tense, face drained of color. "You should not be awake," he said, though his voice sounded hollow. "Neither should you," she whispered. They searched each other's faces, each recognizing the fear, the exhaustion, the confusion, trying to swallow them whole. "Everything I have built," he murmured, "my company, my reputation, my ability to help others, all crumbling, because someone decided to twist something pure into something filthy." His hand pressed to his forehead. "And you will be dragged into this for months, maybe years. That is what I cannot bear." She swallowed hard. "I am not afraid of the truth." He looked up sharply. "The truth is not what they want. The truth does not sell. Scandal does, power does, misery does." He paced again, gripping the back of a chair. "They want you to be a victim, so they can paint me as a monster." She stepped closer, her voice shaking. "I am not a victim, and you are not a monster." Elias laughed softly, bitterly, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "To them, I am a headline, not a human." He turned to the window, watching the rain. "They will continue until they break me. I have seen this before. The machine does not stop." Lena felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "What will you do tomorrow?" "Fight," he said quietly. But his voice lacked conviction. She moved closer, carefully, gently. "You do not have to face it alone." His jaw tightened. "Yes, I do. If you stand beside me publicly, they will tear you apart too. Your brother, your entire life will be affected." She shook her head fiercely. "I do not care what they say about me." "Then let me care for once." He snapped, then immediately softened. "Lena, if they come for me, fine. I will survive that. But I will not let you be destroyed in the crossfire." Tears stung her eyes. "You are pushing me away." "I am protecting you," he corrected. She felt her throat close, but she nodded understanding, even though it hurt like a blade sliding between ribs. Hours later, the building grew quiet, but sleep did not come. Lena eventually drifted into the piano room, the place where she always found a semblance of peace. But tonight the silence there felt wrong, hollow, like something missing. She sat at the piano bench, brushing her fingers over the cool keys, wishing she knew how to steady both their worlds with one simple chord. The hours crawled. At dawn, she returned to her room, only to find an envelope on her pillow. Her heart lurched painfully. She tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Elias' handwriting clean, sharp, controlled. Do not look for me. You deserve peace, even if I cannot find mine. The sentence looked like blood on white paper, final, irrevocable. Lena choked on a sob, clutching the letter to her chest. No, not like this. She rushed through the penthouse, calling his name, but everything was still. His office empty, his bedroom untouched, his keys, his watch, his phone gone. Only the faint smell of his cologne lingered in the air like a ghost. Panic surged through her as she called the driver, his assistant, the security desk. No one had seen him. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She sank to the floor in the hallway, shaking violently, her breath shattering in short, broken gasps. For the next 3 days, the penthouse became a hollow echo. She cleaned rooms he might never return. To replayed his music in her mind, searched the city with desperate eyes, checking every corner, every cafe, every place he might have gone. Reporters swarmed the building, increasing each hour headlines, growing more vicious, more twisted. On the third night, she curled in the piano room, unable to fight the grief any longer. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood, whispering his name. Her pain poured out until her tears ran dry. When she lifted her gaze, she saw the unfinished sheet music still on the stand, the final measure empty like a wound. And in that moment, she understood the truth he could not say aloud. Elias had not disappeared to protect himself. He had disappeared because he believed he was the danger. He believed she deserved someone whole, someone untouched by grief, someone unbroken. But he was wrong. She pressed a hand over her heart, whispering into the quiet, "You do not get to decide that for me." And with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose, she stood. She wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, picked up the contract, the real one she had kept hidden carefully in her drawer since the beginning. Her hands no longer trembled. If he would not fight for himself, she would fight for him. She marched to the elevator with fierce determination, her voice steady now. "You stepped through the door for me, Elias. Now it is my turn to bring you back." Lena arrived at the Carter Mercer Tower just after sunrise. Her hood pulled low over her head, the contract folder clutched tightly against her chest. As reporters swarmed the steps like a living tide, camera flashes burst in rapid succession, erupting in white sparks around her. But she pushed through, weaving between bodies, ignoring the barrage of questions hurled in her direction. "Miss, are you the woman in the leaked contract? Was the arrangement intimate? Did he pay you to stay overnight? Is the billionaire missing because of you?" Each question was a knife, but she kept moving, refusing to slow, refusing to let anyone claim a story that did not belong to them. Security guards recognized her and created a small path through the chaos, guiding her into the lobby, where the world suddenly fell silent except for the faint hum of the elevator. Her breath trembled as she stepped inside, gripping the railing to keep herself steady. She whispered to herself, "Stay strong. He would do this for you." When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, she stepped into a cold corridor, lined with glass offices and stone-faced executives, whispering urgently, as soon as they saw her. Word traveled fast. By the time Lena reached the boardroom, the door was already cracked open, voices inside buzzing with tension. Victor Hale was speaking. The leak is damaging enough, but the disappearance of Elias makes us look unstable, incompetent, even dangerous to investors. We need a decisive move to show leadership, and that means permanent removal. Another board member added, "And what of the woman in the photo? If she testifies against him, the scandal becomes irreversible." Lena's pulse hammered, but she pushed the door open fully, and every head snapped toward her. The room fell silent as she strode forward, shoulders squared, eyes steady. "I am the woman in the photo," she said, voice clear. "And I am here to tell you the truth." Victor stiffened his jaw, tightening in a way that made her skin crawl. "You cannot be here," he snapped. "Security, take her out." No one moved. Her calm confidence rooted them in place. She reached into her folder and laid the real contract on the polished table, spreading its pages like evidence in a courtroom. "This is the original contract signed months ago, not the one leaked, not the one you passed to the media." Several board members leaned forward, eyes widening. She pointed to the final, handwritten clause in Elias' unmistakable penmanship. "This agreement shall end if emotional involvement becomes real. At that point, both parties are free." She lifted her gaze, sweeping across the room. The leaked version removed this clause, twisted the intention, and added lines that never existed. "Elias never coerced me, never bought my presence, never asked for anything inappropriate. He was protecting his mental health while battling grief so deep most people would not survive it." She steadied her breath. "He asked for quiet. That is all." No one spoke. The weight of her words settled into the tense air like dust in sunlight. A silver-haired board member adjusted her glasses, her voice soft. "Miss Reyes, are you saying the leaked documents were falsified?" Lena met her gaze without wavering. "Yes, and I am saying someone here helped leak them." That provoked a ripple of alarm across the room. Victor shot up from his chair, slamming a hand against the table. "This is outrageous." She is desperate, grasping at anything to protect him. She pointed to the signature on the forged document. "The one leaked to the press has a timestamp from the internal server used only by senior staff, and the formatting does not match legal templates. Whoever leaked it accessed files illegally." Victor paled but masked it with a sneer. "You have no proof." She stepped closer until only the table separated them. "I have enough, and the truth is spreading as we speak." She gestured to the screens lining the wall, now displaying muted news channels. One by one, notifications popped up, breaking allegations of altered documents in Mercer investigation. Whistleblower claims contract was falsified. Legal experts question validity of leaked evidence. The board members looked at each other, murmuring. The older woman spoke again. "If this is true, Mr. Hale, the company could face legal liability." Victor sputtered. "This is absurd. She is lying." He turned on Lena. "You are with him, are you not? Emotionally involved, compromised." She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Yes, I care about him, but that does not make anything I said untrue. It makes me willing to stand here while he is gone, because you left him with nothing except blame." The room stilled at her final words, weighing the truth inside them. After a moment, the chair of the board, a man with an expression carved from stone, cleared his throat. "We will review the evidence. Effective immediately, Elias Mercer is reinstated pending investigation into the leak." Victor's face drained of color rage. flaring beneath his skin. "You are making a mistake." The chair turned to security. "Escort Mr. Hale to his office. He is suspended until further notice." Victor barked protest, but the guards moved with firm hands, guiding him out the door. When it slammed shut, everyone exhaled at once. Lena nearly collapsed from the adrenaline surging through her limbs, but she kept her head high. Someone asked softly, "Where is Mr. Mercer now?" Lena looked down at the contract, her fingers brushing the handwritten clause. "I do not know, but I will find him." She gathered the folder and walked toward the door. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone vibrated with notifications. News outlets were reporting the reversal. Comments flooded social media demanding accountability for the forged leak. The world was changing course, and she had been the one to move it. Yet none of it mattered until she found him. She exited the building and faced the gray skyline, whispering into the wind, "Elias, wherever you are, I am coming back for you. And this time I am not leaving without you." The road to Michigan felt longer than any distance Lena had ever traveled, not because of the miles, but because of the ache twisting deep in her chest, a relentless fear that she was already too late. She drove for hours, following fragments of clues, Elias' old calendar entries. A memory of him mentioning a lakeside studio, a note scribbled on the back of a music sheet. Each detail pointed toward the cabin he once built for his daughter, a sanctuary of sound and memory, tucked near the quiet shores of Lake Michigan. As she neared the address, the city melted away, replaced by tall, whispering pines, and a sky streaked with soft winter gray. The cabin appeared just as the forest opened its arms, a dark silhouette framed by falling snow, its windows dark, its silence heavy. Lena's pulse quickened. She parked the car, stepped into the snow, and approached the door, her breath forming small, trembling clouds. The handle was cold beneath her fingers as she pushed the door open, slowly revealing a dimly lit room with wooden walls and a piano at its center, like a shrine untouched by time. And there he was. Elias sat hunched over the piano, his shoulders curved inward, his head bowed as if the weight of the world pressed down upon him. He looked smaller somehow, a man carved by solitude and shadows. For a moment she only watched him, taking in the sight of his hands resting motionless on the keys, the same hands that once created melodies that made her heart swell. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath. "Elias!" He flinched as though struck, his fingers curling slightly, but he did not turn. Lena stepped closer, her boots crunching softly against the floor. "Elias, please look at me." Slowly he lifted his head, revealing eyes rimmed with exhaustion and something deeper resignation. "You should not be here," he said, voice hoarse. "You should be far away from all this, far away from me." She shook her head, her throat tightening. "I am exactly where I should be." He let out a bitter breath, fingers twitching toward the keys. "I destroy everything I touch," His voice cracked. "My family, my company, my own life, and now yours. You deserve a life, not a battlefield." Lena moved around the piano until she stood directly in front of him, refusing to let him hide within the dim light. "You left because you thought it would protect me, but all it did was break us both." His gaze dropped, and she reached out gently, lifting his chin so he had to meet her eyes. "You do not get to decide that I am better off without you." His breath trembled, and he whispered, "Lena, you do not understand. The board they." She cut him off softly. "I already face them." She placed the real contract on the piano, her finger tapping the handwritten clause. "I told them everything. They reinstated you and suspended Victor. Elias stared at the paper confusion, mixing with disbelief, then sorrow. You should not have had to do that. You stood for me when I ran. You gave up safety for someone too broken to fight. She leaned closer, her voice steady. I stood for the truth, and for you. His eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion. He swallowed hard. I came here because this was where the last song ended. I thought if I stayed long enough, maybe the silence would swallow the memories. Lena stepped closer until she was beside him, the soft glow of the single lamp illuminating the quiet desperation etched across his features. She touched the sheet music on the stand, the final measure still blank like an open wound. You did not come here to forget, she whispered. You came because this is where she lived, not died. Elias inhaled sharply, as though she had struck a truth he had never dared speak. His hand lifted hesitating before touching the photograph of his daughter tucked beside the piano. I cannot finish the song, he murmured. Every time I try, I hear the fire, the screams, the silence. I think if I finish it, the last piece of her will disappear. Lena slipped onto the bench beside him, her shoulder brushing his warmth trembling through her. She placed her hand gently over his on the keys. Then do not finish it alone. Let me be here, with you. His breath shuddered, his eyes closed. For a long moment they sat in shared stillness, snow tapping softly against the cabin window like a distant heartbeat. Then slowly, cautiously, he pressed the first key. A familiar note filled the cabin, fragile like glass. He pressed another, then another, until the melody began to form, the one she had heard night after night through the cracked door. Lena joined him, her fingers moving gently alongside his, offering harmony where he faltered, strength where he hesitated. The music rose, weaving their breaths, their grief, their hope into one trembling sound. When they reached the final empty measure, Elias' hands shook violently. I cannot, he whispered, voice breaking. She covered his hands with hers, whispering, Yes, you can. You already did. He looked at her through a haze of tears. How? She pressed a slow, steady note, then added a soft lift at the end, her voice gentle. This is yours, and this is mine. And together it becomes hers again. Something inside him cracked open, a soundless gasp, a sob he had held in for years. Tears spilled freely down his cheeks, and he leaned into her, his forehead resting against hers, as the last notes echoed around them. The song was complete, his daughter's memory not fading, but finally freed from pain. When the final chord settled into silence, Elias cupped her face, his hands still trembling. Lena, he whispered, voice raw, you walked through my darkness, you brought me back to the light. She shook her head, tears falling. No, you walked to the light. I only held the door open. He leaned in, their lips meeting in a fragile, trembling kiss, soft as snowfall, warm as forgiveness. A kiss without hunger or desperation, nothing but the quiet truth of two wounded hearts, finding their way to each other. When they finally pulled apart, he whispered the words he once believed he would never speak again. Lena, I am home because you came for me. 1 month later, the world outside had resumed its restless rhythm. But inside the penthouse, a gentler life had taken root. A life built not on wealth or power, but on the quiet moments two people had once been too broken to imagine. The cracked door that had defined them for so long was gone, replaced by a soft archway Elias had ordered to be installed, so nothing in the home would ever separate them again. Morning light spilled through wide windows, casting warm gold across the polished floors as Lena stepped barefoot into the living area, her hair loose, her smile soft. She carried 2 mugs of cocoa, the way he liked it, barely sweet with a hint of cinnamon, and found Elias sitting at the piano, not playing, just resting his fingers on the keys, as if listening to something only he could hear. He looked up when she approached, his expression opening like dawn. "You are up early," he said, voice warm, in a way she still was not used to hearing. She set a mug beside him and slid onto the bench, leaning gently against his shoulder. "Habit," she murmured. "Old schedule. My body thinks I should be sweeping floors at this hour." Elias chuckled and kissed the top of her head. "The only thing you are sweeping now is me off my feet." She nudged him with a soft laugh, still shy when he complimented her, but no longer shrinking from it. She glanced at the stack of papers on the piano top, the finalized foundation charter, printed neatly with the name Mercer Reyes Music Therapy Fund. The organization would launch next week, dedicated to children battling trauma, autism, and chronic anxiety. A small drawing on the top corner revealed a crayon sketch of a piano with 2 stick figures sitting side by side, drawn by her brother Mateo during his last visit. "You think he will like the opening ceremony?" Elias asked, nodding toward the drawing. Lena smiled. "He already asked if he can wear his superhero cape." Elias grinned. "Then the board of directors will have the most powerful guest of honor on earth." She touched his arm. "Speaking of the board, how did the meeting go yesterday?" He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her fingers. "I am officially reinstated permanently." They apologized, publicly, twice. She exhaled in relief, though she knew the real victory had never been his title, but the man he had become again. She watched him trace a hand across the piano keys, gently, like greeting an old friend. "You miss playing," she said softly. "Not the way I used to," he answered, eyes distant. "I do not play for punishment anymore. I play to breathe." She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, closing her eyes, as the steady beat of his heart filled her ears. For years he had lived with silence that felt like drowning. Now the quiet felt like peace. In the afternoon, the 2 of them walked through Central Park, bundled against the early winter chill, savoring how ordinary and miraculous it felt to walk side by side without fear. Occasionally, someone glanced their way, recognition flickering, but no one approached. A recent public statement from Lena had gone viral. Her calm, steady explanation of the real contract, her declaration that nothing about their arrangement had ever been coercive. Her final line had been replayed endlessly. "You cannot twist love into a scandal because love refuses to break." The city had absorbed her words, letting the scandal die with a kind of collective sigh. As they strolled, Elias slipped his hand into hers, threading their fingers together. "Strange," he murmured. "I spent years surrounded by millions of people, yet never felt seen. And now," he looked at her with quiet awe, "I feel understood by one." She squeezed his hand. That is all anyone really needs. That evening they returned to the penthouse, the view of the city glowing beneath them like a constellation. Come to rest at their feet. Lena prepared dinner, humming softly, while Elias set the table, insisting on doing his share. When they finally sat down, the air felt warm and human and wonderfully normal. After dinner, Elias asked her to join him in the piano room. She followed him in curiosity blooming. The lamp cast a soft amber light over the polished wood. He reached into his pocket and her heartbeat quickened. He did not kneel, Instead, he sat on the bench and gently guided her to sit beside him, their hips touching their hands meeting atop the keys. "Lena," he began, voice low and sincere, "this piano took everything from me for years. My family, my joy, my peace. I never believed I could sit here again without feeling like I was drowning." He turned slightly, meeting her gaze with eyes steady and full. "But you walked through every wall I put up. You heard every silence I tried to hide. You stayed, not because I am a billionaire, not because you had nowhere else to go, but because your heart is braver than any music I have ever written." Her throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. Elias reached into his pocket and opened a small velvet box, revealing a simple silver ring, engraved with 4 words, "Finish the song, Lena." She gasped a soft, broken sound. Elias took her hand. "Every night you watched me through a cracked door, waiting for the moment I might let you in. And I was too lost to realize the door was never locked." He slipped the ring gently onto her finger, his voice trembling. "From today there is no cracked door, no distance, only us, if you will have me." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes, Elias, yes. Of course, yes." He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest, with a tenderness carved from every wound he had ever survived. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in quiet warmth, until he lifted her chin and kissed her not with desperation, but with the soft, steady certainty of a man who had finally come home. Later, as they sat on the piano bench, her fingers intertwined, Lena whispered a sentence that drifted into the night like the final line of a song. "Every night I watched you through the cracked door, until one day you opened it for me." Elias pressed his forehead to hers, smiling through tears. "And now," he murmured, "it stays open forever." If this story touched your heart even just a little, then take a deep breath with me right now, because what you felt is exactly why this channel exists. Every night, somewhere in the world, someone is standing behind their own cracked door, hoping that love or healing or one simple act of kindness might finally reach them. And if you are still here, still reading, still feeling something, then you are part of that circle of quiet courage. Stories like this one remind us that people are not defined by their scars, their mistakes, their loneliness, or the headlines others write about them. They are defined by what they choose to stand for when everything falls apart. You saw Lena stand for Elias even when she had every reason to walk away. You watched Elias choose love again even when grief told him he never deserved another chance. And maybe, just maybe, you saw a small reflection of yourself in their journey, because all of us at some point have stood outside a metaphorical door, longing for a world where someone finally hears us. If you believe in second chances, in slow healing, in love that grows in silence and storms, then please stay with this channel. Your presence helps stories like this reach people who desperately need them. And if you want more emotional, slow-burn romance, more stories with heart and truth and redemption, then hit subscribe right now so you never miss what comes next. Tomorrow or the next day or the next week, another story will arrive, one that might speak to a part of you you forgot existed. Leave a comment too, even a simple hello or your city, or how this story made you feel. Because I read every message and I carry your words with me when creating the next chapter in this growing world of hope and healing. And if there is someone in your life who needs a reminder that they matter, send them this story. You never know how far one small act can travel. Thank you for being here, for choosing to spend your time in this soft corner of the internet, for allowing these characters to breathe inside your heart. And if tonight feels heavy or lonely or too still, remember this: you are not standing behind that cracked door alone. Not anymore. Now take a moment, breathe in, breathe out, and let the final line of this story stay with you as you step into whatever tomorrow brings. Every night she watched him through the cracked door until one day she stepped through forever. May you find a door like that too, and may love meet you on the other side.